The breast cancer diagnosis report sat untouched on my coffee table for 3 full days. 3 days where my family walked past it countless times, reaching for the fresh fruit I'd carefully arranged beside it, glancing at their phones, watching television, yet somehow never noticing the medical papers bearing my name. It was as if the report, like me, had become invisible in my own home, despite being in plain sight. For decades, I had been the backbone of our household. At 65, I was still the one everyone depended on picking up my grandchildren from school, preparing dinner every evening, maintaining our home while my husband James enjoyed his retirement from the art museum where he'd been director. My children often remarked how lucky I was to have married such a distinguished man, never once considering what I had sacrificed for this seemingly perfect life. The day everything changed began with a hospital appointment. I missed picking up my grandson Zach from school, and suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My daughter-in-law Leona berated me, asking what could possibly be more important than collecting Zach. My son Daniel was in meetings, too busy with important matters. And no one seemed to care that I had informed them about my appointment that morning. Even my husband called later, demanding to know why dinner wasn't ready and where I had been all day. Standing on that crowded bus, clutching my cancer report and medication in one hand and groceries in the other, something inside me finally snapped. The bitter truth crystallized in that moment. My family only noticed my absence when it inconvenienced them. The medical report that had been sitting in our home for days went completely unmentioned, while missing one dinner and one school pickup threw them into crisis. That evening, I made a decision that would forever alter the course of my life. Instead of going home to cook and apologize as I always had, I stayed on the bus past my stop. For the first time in 40 years of marriage, I chose myself. A kind young woman on the bus, who I later learned was named Grace, noticed my distress and offered me a tissue. This simple act of compassion from a stranger highlighted the stark absence of care from my own family. What followed was a personal revolution. I treated myself to dinner at the upscale restaurant my family had dined at, but never thought to take me to. I returned home only to discover my husband's former flame, Vivian, in our bedroom, supposedly resting due to feeling unwell. The disrespect was the final straw. I announced to my shocked family that I would no longer be their unpaid servant, no more school pickups, no more dinners, no more invisible labor. My family's reaction was entirely predictable panic, anger, and disbelief that I could be so selfish. None of them considered why I might be acting this way, or noticed my exhaustion, or asked about my health. They only saw the inconvenience to their comfortable routines. My husband stormed out after Vivian, and I began packing my bags. The next day, I left on a solo trip to Portland, a city I'd always wanted to visit, but James had dismissed as too damp. I blocked their frantic calls and messages, which were focused not on my well-being, but on who would pick up the children and prepare meals. For the first time in decades, I experienced true freedom, exploring botanical gardens, trying new restaurants, and having a professional photo shoot that captured a radiance in me I hadn't seen in years. When I eventually returned, it wasn't to resume my old life, but to ask for a divorce. The woman who had spent decades supporting everyone else was finally choosing her own path, despite her cancer diagnosis. My family was bewildered, unable to comprehend that I could walk away from the role they had assigned me. Their world had fallen apart in my absence, hiring separate people for cooking, cleaning, childcare, and elder care. Suddenly understanding that I had been performing the work of multiple full-time positions without recognition or compensation. But it was too late. I had glimpsed another way of living, one where I mattered not for what I could do for others, but simply because I existed. If love has to be begged for, I realized, and a home has to be earned through sacrifice alone, then maybe it was never really mine to begin with. I had just walked out of the doctor's office, my hand clutching a folder of medical results and a small bag of prescriptions. The evening rush hour enveloped me as I squeezed onto a packed city bus, groceries in one hand, cancer diagnosis in the other. That's when my phone erupted with notifications, not concerned inquiries about my health, but demands for my service. "Clara, why haven't you picked up Zach from school yet?" Leona's sharp voice blasted through the receiver. "He's the only kid left in the classroom and he's crying his eyes out." Panic surged in my chest. "Did someone pick him up already? I told Daniel this morning he was supposed to get his son today. I had a doctor's appointment this afternoon." She cut me off with an irritated snort. "Oh my God, Clara, what could possibly be more important than Zach? He's still at school. You need to get over there now. I can't leave." She added hurriedly, "I already made plans for dinner and shopping with my girlfriends. And Daniel's been in meetings all afternoon. He probably forgot. As usual, this kind of trivial stuff isn't worth bothering him with." I opened my mouth to explain that I wouldn't make it in time either, but she'd already hung up. Before the call dropped, I clearly heard her complaining to her friend, "Daniel's mom is so useless she can't even handle a simple favor. Totally unreliable." The tightness in my chest intensified. My hand hovered over the screen, about to dial my husband James, but then I froze. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. "Your body's already very weak. You'll need someone to accompany you during future treatments, and you must avoid stress and household chores as much as possible." So be it. If I'm no longer good enough to help, then maybe it's time everyone took care of their own responsibilities. After all, Zach is their child, not mine. I stood there on the bus, dazed, as it rolled past 2 more stops without me noticing. That's when my phone rang again this time. It was James. "Clara, have you been out wandering around all day? Do you even realize Zach's still at school, waiting for someone to pick him up? I just got home, and Leona called me in a panic. Said she tried calling you and couldn't reach you. Why haven't you gone to get him yet? The teacher's been waiting there this whole time. Can you imagine how upset Zach must be?" His voice kept coming through, full of reprimand. My chest tightened even more, but I stayed silent. When he finally stopped talking, I replied quietly but firmly, "That boy has a mother and a father. Maybe they should stop relying on an old woman to do everything." Maybe it was my tone cool, distant, something he'd never heard from me before that caught him off guard. He paused for a second, then snapped, "What kind of talk is that? Clara, don't take this the wrong way, but Zach is our grandson. Is this really the kind of attitude a grandmother should have? Forget it. I'll go pick Zach up myself today. You just head home and get dinner started. The kids have been working hard all day. It's not right if they come home to an empty table." I wanted to tell him that I wasn't feeling well, either that my body, after all the hospital visits, was already running on fumes. But the words stopped in my throat. I'd trained myself not to complain. Years of swallowing every ache, every exhaustion, every feeling, because what did it ever get me? At best, a dismissive, "You're being dramatic." So for the first time, I didn't respond. I ended the call before he could say another word. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd skipped making just one dinner, and suddenly everyone came after me like I'd committed some terrible crime. Yet the breast cancer diagnosis report had been sitting on the living room coffee table for 3 full days, and not a single person had asked me about it. They sit on that couch every day, glued to their phones, watching TV, playing games, even helping themselves to the fruit I carefully replace with fresh ones each day. But somehow, not one of them had glanced at the medical report right next to it. Was it just because my name was printed on the cover? Did that make it invisible to everyone by default? Like me living in that house for decades, giving and giving, yet never truly seen. My children always say, "Mom, you really lucked out marrying Dad. You never had to work, and you got to be the elegant wife of an art museum director." Relatives gush about how James carried the whole family, provided everything, raised 2 accomplished children. What a remarkable man. The ache in my chest sharpened again, and without realizing it, tears had already started streaming down my face. I turned my head toward the window, hoping no one would see me cry. At my age, there's always that fear of looking pathetic to strangers. The city lights outside blurred in a veil of tears flickering. Distant, unreachable. So many homes lit up across the city, yet not one of those lights felt like it truly belonged to me. Just then, a pale hand reached into my vision, offering me a tissue. It was a young woman from earlier on the bus. "Ma'am, are you okay? Here, take this." She smiled gently. "The breeze by the windows is pretty strong. Be careful not to catch cold. Oh, when I saw the bag of medicine you're holding, I figured maybe you weren't feeling well." I took the tissue and nodded, my voice catching as I whispered, "Thank you." But somehow, the more I wiped, the harder the tears fell, until it felt like everything inside me was finally pouring out. One simple act of kindness from a stranger, something my own family hadn't shown me in years. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I made a quiet, unwavering decision. If love has to be begged for, and a home has to be earned through sacrifice alone, then maybe it was never really mine to begin with. And if that's the case, then I'm done wanting it. I never intended to disappear. The decision crystallized in a single moment on that crowded bus, as tears streamed down my face and a kind stranger offered me a tissue. For 65 years, I had defined myself through others as James's wife, as Daniel and Anna's mother, as Zach and Olivia's grandmother. That evening, with my cancer diagnosis weighing heavily in my pocket and my family's demands still ringing in my ears, I made a choice that would forever alter the course of my life. When the bus reached its final stop, I didn't get off. I stayed seated, watching as others filed past me into the night. The young woman, Grace was her name, noticed my distress and remained by my side, though she'd already missed her own stop. This simple act of compassion from a stranger stood in stark contrast to the indifference I'd received from my own family. 3 days the cancer report had sat on our coffee table. 3 days, and not one of them had noticed or asked. "Ma'am, you know medicine has come a long way," Grace said softly as she helped me into a cab. "Don't lose hope. Everything might turn out just fine." Her words lingered with me as the taxi drove away. Hope. Not for my cancer diagnosis, but for something I hadn't dared dream of in decades, a life that belonged to me. Instead of directing the driver home, I asked to be taken to an exclusive restaurant in our neighborhood, one my husband and children had raved about for years, but had never once thought to take me to. Perhaps they never saw me as someone who belonged in places like that. To them, I was just a housewife, someone who saved money, cooked meals, did laundry, not someone who needed to experience fine dining without thinking too much. I turned and walked in for the first time in my life. I sat down alone and treated myself to a proper, elegant dinner. The groceries I'd bought earlier were already long gone, tossed into a trash can after I'd stepped off the bus. I used to worry about every dollar, trying to save for my kids and grandkids. The fewer luxuries I indulged in, the more I could leave for them. Even calling a cab used to feel like a splurge I had to justify. But now that I was sick, I realized if there was anything left I still wanted to do, I should do it. No one knows how many days they have left. So I tasted every bite of the meal they used to rave about and quietly realized it wasn't all that special. I'm not some fool who can't tell good from bad. I'd just never been given the chance to choose for myself before. After dinner, I took a slow walk home. By the time I reached the door, it was past 10. The house was a mess. Dinner had just ended, and the dining table looked like a battlefield. Plates everywhere, crumpled napkins, leftover bones from chicken wings scattered across the surface. The living room was no better, like a small hurricane had swept through. Leona and Anna were slouched on the couch, chewing on fried chicken wings, eyes fixed on the television. Zach and Olivia sat nearby, mimicking the adults, each clutching a bag of snacks while glued to their tablets. Out in the backyard, James, Daniel, and Anna's husband were drinking beer and chatting about retirement plans and stock market trends, as if there wasn't a single problem in the world worth worrying about. I stepped through the door, changed into my house slippers, and stood there for a moment. No one even looked up. That night, after discovering Vivian James's old flame in our bedroom, supposedly resting from feeling unwell, something in me finally broke. I announced to my stunned family that I was no longer their unpaid maid. No more school pickups, no more dinner on the table, no more housework taken for granted. Their reactions were predictable shock, anger, disbelief that I could be so selfish. Not one of them connected my behavior to the cancer diagnosis that had been sitting in plain sight for days. So I packed my bags and left. I didn't know how to book plane tickets online, so I did the simplest thing I could think of. I hailed a cab and told the driver to take me straight to the airport. Standing in the terminal, watching the destination board flicker through names, I picked a city I'd always wanted to see. I walked up to the counter and bought a ticket for the next available flight to Portland. Before boarding, I hesitated for a second and then sent a message to the family just enough to keep them from calling the police. "I'm going on a trip. Don't bother me." Then I powered off my phone. Portland was everything I'd imagined the city of roses, a botanical paradise on the West Coast. James had always said it was too damp, that the air there feels sticky, hardly elegant. But I didn't need elegance, I just needed joy. I hired a private VIP tour guide and spent the most carefree, liberating week I'd had in decades. I visited every major attraction, tried all the food I'd been curious about, and finally made it to the botanical garden I'd always dreamed of seeing. I even had a full travel photo shoot, my personal guide capturing moments of my journey with care and precision. When I saw the photos afterward, I barely recognized myself. Bright eyes, glowing skin, radiant energy. There was a lightness in my expression I hadn't seen in years. So it turns out I could shine too, just like Vivian. My guide even taught me how to use travel apps on my phone rideshare services, flight and hotel bookings, maps, travel reviews. I finally knew how to navigate the world without needing anyone's help. For years, whenever I asked my kids to teach me something simple, how to look up a recipe, how to use a new app, they always brushed me off, too impatient to bother. Not anymore. Now I didn't need anyone. Day by day, I felt lighter, freer. Even my body felt stronger, more energized. I wasn't just traveling through Portland, I was journeying toward myself. The woman I might have been if I hadn't spent decades disappearing into the background of everyone else's lives. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't afraid. Whatever lay ahead, treatment, recovery, or something else entirely, I would face it on my own terms, as my own person. Cancer had given me the most unexpected gift, the courage to finally choose myself. When I didn't return home that night, I imagined the confusion would be temporary. I expected indignation, perhaps some petty complaints, but nothing more. What I didn't anticipate was the complete unraveling of the household I had managed with silent efficiency for decades. My phone, which I had finally silenced after years of constant accessibility, buzzed with increasingly desperate messages. Mom, if you're gone, who's picking Zach up tomorrow? No one cooked dinner. Dad doesn't know how. What are we supposed to eat? Mom, don't be so stubborn. You wouldn't really go on vacation alone. You probably just booked a hotel nearby. Bet you'll be home by morning. Seriously, you don't even know how to use apps. You don't have family nearby. What if you get scammed? What if you end up lost on the street? The final message from James made me laugh out loud, cold and bitter. The older you get, the more childish you become. I'm curious to see if this house still functions without you. It didn't take long for that hollow pride to come crashing down. The very next morning, I learned that James had been rushed to the hospital at 4:00 a.m. As I expected, it was his chronic stomach condition acting up, triggered by that spicy Mexican takeout and the alcohol he'd insisted on drinking. At first, he tried to tough it out, convinced he could ride it through, but by the middle of the night, the pain had him doubled over. He searched the house top to bottom for the medication. Nothing. Eventually, he woke Daniel up, asking him to help, still no luck. Then came the frantic calls to me, dozens of missed calls, voicemails, texts. But I'd slept like a rock after a full day of sightseeing in Portland, and I didn't hear a single one. The moment my phone powered on, Daniel's call came through almost instantly. Mom, finally you picked up. His voice was thick with exhaustion. Dad had a terrible flare-up last night. His stomach pain got so bad, we had to take him to the ER. I've been with him half the night, and I still have to get to work this morning, plus drop Zach at school. I can't handle all this. Come on, Mom. Don't be like this. Just come back and take care of him. I listened quietly, then calmly replied, Didn't you understand what I said yesterday? I'm on vacation. Please don't disturb me. And I hung up. In the end, it all came down to this. Once the tireless, all-capable, never-complaining supermom disappeared from the household, everything began to fall apart. And only when they finally started searching for help did they realize just how deep the problem really was. Hiring a housekeeper to cook and clean didn't solve everything, because that housekeeper wouldn't look after the kids. A full-time nanny for the children didn't do housework. The daycare specialist who could care for Olivia wouldn't handle school pickups for Zach, now a first grader, so they needed a second nanny just for the afternoon shift. One helper wasn't enough, not even close. And on top of all that, James was still stuck in the hospital, needing constant care himself. That's when they finally realized what I'd been all along, a full-service, on-call, multi-skilled domestic operator who charged nothing, asked nothing, and even provided emotional support on demand. Suddenly, the tune started to change. What had begun as finger-pointing and complaints turned into saccharine attempts to coax me home. Even Zach and Olivia were coached to take turns calling, their tiny voices chirping through voicemail. "Grandma, we miss you. Come back soon." Text after text followed, sugary sweet but desperate. "Mom, your protest has gone on long enough. Please come home. We really need you here." And at 3:00 a.m., a final message from Daniel, raw and unraveling. "Mom, I really can't do this anymore." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they'd taken my labor for granted: the cooking, cleaning, childcare, school pickups, grocery shopping, laundry, the invisible threads that held their lives together, attributed to nothing more than a housewife's duty. How often had I heard them say, "Mom, you really lucked out marrying Dad. You never had to work." Yet now, faced with the reality of my absence, they were hiring multiple professionals with specific skills and designated hours, each demanding fair compensation for their time. The myth of the effortless homemaker was crumbling before their eyes, revealing the complex, demanding, and skilled labor that had been dismissed for so long. When I finally decided to return after my Portland trip, I didn't come back as the same woman who had left. The cancer report that had sat ignored on the coffee table for 3 days had become the catalyst for my transformation, and I had no intention of stepping back into my old role. I arrived to find James and Vivian dancing a fiery tango at a community event, their movements perfectly synchronized, their connection undeniable. I didn't feel anger, just a faint, hollow ache rising in my chest. They had always been a pair meant to be in some way I could never compete with. Back at the house, Vivian had moved in temporarily to help with household management, though she clearly had no idea where anything was kept or how to maintain the routines that had once seemed so effortless. The plants I'd lovingly tended had wilted from neglect, drooping sadly under the weight of a week's indifference. Standing in the living room, surrounded by the chaos my absence had created, I made my final decision. "James," I said calmly, "I want a divorce." His expression shifted instantly panic, even a flicker of helplessness and emotion I'd rarely ever seen cross his face. But it lasted only a moment before he composed himself again, slipping back into that cool, calculated composure he wore like armor. "Clara, that's not funny," he said, his voice low. "At your age, this kind of joke really isn't appropriate." "I'm not joking," I said firmly. "I've been thinking about this seriously, especially over the past week. For both of us, this might just be the most honest form of relief." His face darkened. "All this just because of that dinner." "You could say that," I replied, then paused. "But it's not just one dinner. It's every dinner that would have come after it. I'm done living my life in the kitchen. I have other things I want to do with the time I have left." I stepped through the front door that evening, exhausted from my hospital appointment and the emotional turmoil of the day. No one looked up as I entered. The house was chaotic dinner plates scattered across the table, family members sprawled on couches, the television blaring. I moved quietly toward our bedroom, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. That's when I saw her. Vivian stood in the hallway, emerging from my bedroom with tousled hair and dressed in silky loungewear. Her face registered surprise before quickly shifting to practiced warmth. "Clara, you're finally back," she said. "I was just telling James he should call you. It's late, and I was worried it wasn't safe for you to be out alone." I froze, unable to process the scene before me. Vivian's presence in our home wasn't entirely new. She'd visited occasionally since moving to a nearby condo last year. But finding her exiting my bedroom, looking so comfortably at home, sent a bolt of realization through me that I couldn't ignore. James had loved Vivian long before he settled for me. They'd been inseparable in college, their romance the stuff of campus legend. Only her marriage to a wealthy older man and subsequent move abroad had created the space for me to enter James's life. Our marriage came with a clear condition: I would abandon my own promising art career to support his ambitions. For 40 years, I'd honored that bargain, believing I'd earned my place in his life. I'd believed that his chapter with Vivian was firmly closed. Hearing the commotion, James rushed from the backyard, his eyes finding Vivian first. "Are you feeling better?" he asked her tenderly. Only then did he notice me, his expression hardening instantly. "She's our guest. Clara, do you have to act like this? Do you even remember where your own front door is? This is completely unacceptable behavior." The stark contrast between his concern for her comfort and his cold dismissal of me wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Still, my family rushed to normalize the situation. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" Anna said, her tone edged with irritation. "You're being really harsh. Vivian just wasn't feeling well. She caught a bit of a cold," Daniel added. "And honestly, you were kind of in the wrong today. So what if Dad said a few words to you? Zach was stuck at school. Of course we were all worried. No one asked where I'd been or if I was okay. No one noticed the pharmacy bag clutched in my hand or remembered the cancer diagnosis report that had sat untouched on our coffee table for 3 days. Instead, Leona glanced at my shopping bag and sneered. "You sure seem to have had a leisurely day, stocking up on all those supplements again. I've told you 100 times those things are a scam. You'd be better off spending money on gifts for Zach and Olivia." She laughed dismissively. "If you're really so bored, maybe take a page from Vivian's book. At least she knows how to dress well and carry herself with taste. She actually looks like she belongs next to James." In that moment, looking at my husband's protective stance beside Vivian, at my children's ready defense of the situation, at the utter disregard for my feelings, something crystallized within me. The cancer diagnosis that sat ignored on our coffee table and the woman lounging in my bedroom were two sides of the same coin, both evidence of my complete invisibility in my own home. For decades, I'd convinced myself that what James and I shared was enough. Not passionate love, perhaps, but a solid partnership built on mutual respect and shared history. Now, watching him hover near Vivian, I saw the truth I'd been denying: the spark, the tenderness, the genuine care I'd always longed for from him. He was capable of all of it, just not with me. Later that night, after the arguments had died down, I stood in our bedroom, the same room where Vivian had rested earlier, and made my decision. I began packing methodically, not in anger, but with a strange, calm clarity. The breast cancer diagnosis had already forced me to confront my mortality. Finding Vivian in my bed compelled me to face another painful truth. I had never been James's first choice. As I folded my clothes into a suitcase, I realized this betrayal was actually setting me free. For years, I'd shape myself to fit the spaces James left for me, contorting into the roles of supportive wife, devoted mother, and tireless grandmother. I'd shrunk myself to accommodate everyone else's needs and dreams. No more. If my remaining time was limited, I would no longer spend it as an afterthought in my own life. The next morning, I would ask James for a divorce, not out of spite or revenge, but because after 40 years of living in the shadow of his first love, I deserved the chance to finally step into the light of my own. James, I said calmly, I want a divorce. His expression shifted instantly panic, even a flicker of helplessness. Emotions I'd rarely seen cross his face. But it lasted only a moment before he composed himself again, slipping back into that cool, calculated composure he wore like armor. Clara, that's not funny, he said, his voice low. At your age, this kind of joke really isn't appropriate. I'm not joking, I said firmly. I've been thinking about this seriously, especially over the past week. For both of us, this might just be the most honest form of relief. His face darkened. All this just because of that dinner. You could say that, I replied, then paused. But it's not just one dinner. It's every dinner that would have come after it. I'm done living my life in the kitchen. I have other things I want to do with the time I have left. The shock on everyone's faces might have been comical if it weren't so revealing. Daniel and Anna, still reeling from James's earlier scolding about treating me like a maid, now looked even more stunned. What? Daniel blurted out. Mom, you're getting a divorce. Why? This isn't because of Aunt Vivian, is it? Anna added quickly. She's just been helping out. We've seen everything clearly. There's nothing going on between her and Dad. You're overthinking this. I shook my head. There was no point explaining anything to them. Let James tell them whatever he wants later, I thought. I looked at James again, voice steady. I've thought about this thoroughly. I'm ending this marriage for good. Mom, you're 65, Daniel said, sounding desperate. You've been a housewife your whole life. How will you even manage after a divorce? Yeah, Anna chimed in. Did someone out there fill your head with that live your own life stuff? Don't be naive, Mom. People just want your money, Daniel added. Even if you meet someone new, they won't be as dependable as Dad. They'll act sweet up front, but in the end, you'll just be their caretaker again. Their words piled on, one after another, louder and more emotional. But all I felt was exhaustion. I'm not asking for your opinions, I cut in sharply. This divorce is between me and your father, not for either of you to meddle in. And for the record, I'm not helpless. I've devoted decades to this household. Legally, I'm entitled to half of everything, plus the 2 properties and inheritance from my parents, more than enough for me to live comfortably. I don't need your concern. That shut them up. They looked genuinely stunned, clearly unaware I'd planned all of this long ago. I turned back to James, still hoping I'd change my mind, still reluctant to go through with it. The air in the room thickened. I knew exactly what James cared about most, pride, especially in front of others, especially in front of Vivian. So I added, just loud enough. If you don't want to look foolish in front of her, then do this cleanly. No drama, no delays. Sure enough, his jaw clenched. He nodded slowly, each word strained through his teeth. Fine, if that's what you want. We'll do it. You'll get what's rightfully yours. I won't hold anything back. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years suddenly lifted. I nodded gently. Good. With that, I stood and walked out. James said nothing, though his eyes were red. Daniel and Anna, however, erupted behind me. Panicked, pleading voices cracking. "Mom, what are you doing? You're tearing this family apart. Are you out of your mind?" I didn't look back. I didn't answer. After leaving, I moved into a fully furnished apartment near the hospital. Quiet, simple, perfect. Kitchen, laundry, everything I needed. It was a place Grace helped me find. The same young woman who had once offered me a tissue on the bus. She'd grown up in a small rural town, worked her way through school, and built a life in the city strong, self-made, kind. We'd exchange contact info after that night, and when she heard about my situation, she took it upon herself to help, finding me a place to stay, even connecting me with a professional caregiver to assist during my radiation therapy. Once I settled in, I took her out to dinner to thank her. It was warm, simple, and real, the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years. That night, just as I was preparing for bed, the family group chat lit up again. Familiar names, familiar noise. Daniel, Anna, her husband, all of them now taking turns trying to convince me to reconsider. "Mom, you're too old for a divorce. It's embarrassing. Think this through. Once you walk away, Dad's still a catch-great pension, kind personality. He'll have women lining up. You'll regret it. You're making a mistake. Mom, a big one." I didn't reply to any of it. And then Daniel sent the message that cut the deepest. "If you can walk away now when we need you most, then don't expect anything from us in the future. Don't expect me to call you Mom anymore." I stared at that message for a long time. Then, without hesitation, I exited the group chat and blocked every number. Everyone except James. We still had paperwork to finalize. After all, the next morning, I ordered a car at 8:30 and headed to the law office. Out of courtesy, I even sent James a reminder text with the time and address. I arrived early. At 9:30 sharp, James appeared at the door. Only then did I finally breathe a sigh of relief. We signed the agreement quickly and headed straight to City Hall to finalize the divorce paperwork. When we handed in the forms, the clerk paused for a split second, visibly surprised, but professionalism kicked in quickly. She glanced between us and asked casually, "Reason for divorce?" James said nothing, his face a blank wall of indifference. I smiled lightly. "If we must give one, let's call it irreconcilable differences." The clerk looked puzzled for a moment, probably wondering how two people who looked so polished could fall apart so neatly. But when she saw how clearly we divided everything, asset split 50-50, no disputes, she skipped any mediation and simply processed the paperwork. As soon as the formalities were over, I turned and walked away. James stood frozen behind me, his face even grayer than before. I didn't give his reaction another glance. While he was still stuck there in his daze, I was already in a cab, moving forward, and just like that, life felt lighter, freer. The radiation treatments were rough, and there were days my body ached with fatigue, but overall it was manageable, and for the first time in decades, I had space, real, uninterrupted space to breathe. The cancer that had once terrified me now seemed less daunting than the life I'd left behind. In choosing myself, I had finally found the courage that had eluded me for 65 years. Sometimes kindness appears in the most unlikely moments. I was sitting on a crowded city bus, tears streaming down my face as I tried to hide my distress from strangers. My cancer diagnosis report was clutched in one hand, grocery bags in the other, and my phone had finally gone silent after a barrage of demanding calls from my family. None of them asking if I was okay. None of them noticing the medical report that had sat on our coffee table for 3 days. That's when a pale hand reached into my vision, offering me a tissue. "Ma'am, are you okay? Here, take this," she said gently. "The breeze by the windows is pretty strong. Be careful not to catch a cold. Oh, when I saw the bag of medicine you're holding, I figured maybe you weren't feeling well." I took the tissue and nodded my thanks. But somehow, the simple act of kindness broke something open inside me. The more I wiped, the harder the tears fell, until it felt like everything I'd been holding back for decades was pouring out. This stranger had shown me more genuine concern in one moment than my family had in years. When the bus reached its final stop, everyone else got off. I stood up unsteadily, swaying a little as I gathered my bags. The young woman noticed immediately and stepped in again, taking most of the weight from my arms without hesitation. "Thank you so much," I said, genuinely moved. "You've really helped me today. You must be exhausted yourself. Commuting this far after work must be tough." She waved it off with a smile. "Not at all. I'm actually just an intern at the hospital where you had your appointment." Then she added, almost sheepishly, "I got off several stops ago, but you looked like you weren't doing so well. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. So I stayed on with you. Do you live nearby?" I froze, guilt washing over me. "Oh no, I don't live around here. I'm so sorry. Let me call a cab to take you home. Thank you for caring, really. But I'm fine." "You don't need to apologize, Gaz," she said gently. "If anything, you should take a cab home. You're not feeling well. Don't push yourself. I can just catch a bus back from the other side of the street." I insisted on walking her to the curb and hailed a cab, ushering her in with me. I had the driver take her home first, then gave directions to head toward mine. As she got out of the car, she turned back with one last warm smile. "Ma'am, you know medicine has come a long way. Don't lose hope. Everything might turn out just fine." I watched her walk away, tears threatening again. Somehow, all the heaviness of the day felt a little lighter, healed just a bit by the kindness of a stranger I hadn't even known an hour ago. Her name was Grace. I learned that during our cab ride, along with the fact that she had grown up in a small rural town, worked her way through medical school, and was now completing her internship at the hospital. There was a quiet resilience in her that reminded me of myself long ago, before I surrendered my dreams to support James's career. After I left James and moved into my own apartment, Grace and I stayed in touch. She came to the hospital nearly every day during my radiation treatments, sometimes to help me talk to the doctors, sometimes just to sit with me through lunch, chatting and offering encouragement with that quiet strength she carried. Other patients thought she was my daughter. They often whispered, "You're lucky to have such a thoughtful girl." I never corrected them. The assumption felt more true than explaining she was just a kind stranger who had offered me a tissue on a bus. Over time, I got to know more about her. She'd grown up in a conservative town where everything favored her younger brother. She worked her way through college, paid her own tuition, and built a life with nothing handed to her. She'd been through more than most people ever knew. The more I learned, the more my heart ached for her. There was a kind of strength in her I admired deeply, and somewhere along the way, I began to consider asking her to be my goddaughter. Strange, really. This was supposed to be the hardest stretch of my life, battling illness and starting over alone, but somehow it had turned into the most peaceful chapter I'd known in years. Grace remembered I once told her I used to paint in college. She kept gently encouraging me to try again, to pick up a brush, even just for fun. When I finally did, she celebrated my small victories with genuine enthusiasm that my own children had never shown for my interests. When her internship eventually came to an end, due to her academic qualifications, the hospital couldn't offer her a permanent position. Her job search wasn't going well either, so I made a decision that surprised even her. I offered to fund her doctoral degree. Education is your passport, I told her. Another degree will open more doors than you can imagine. She cried while thanking me, insisting on writing out a promissory note, promising she'd pay me back one day when she could stand firmly on her own. I tucked the note away, knowing I would never cash it in. My family, of course, was furious when they found out. When they finally discovered I had cancer, only after James found my old medical report, while cleaning the house, they rushed to the hospital, full of belated concern and accusations about keeping secrets. Their performative worry quickly turned to suspicion when they saw Grace by my side. Leona, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until then, finally broke her silence. Clara, I really think you need to be careful. You know how people are these days. You've got 3 properties and plenty of money in your account. What if she's just here for your inheritance? That money was supposed to go to Daniel and Anna. Zach and Olivia are counting on it too. You can't just hand it over to an outsider. And before I could respond, James raised his hand and smacked Daniel hard across the face. A sharp, echoing sound filled the room. "Tell your wife to shut her damn mouth," he said, voice low but cutting like glass. "Don't you ever repeat something so disgraceful again." I felt a surge of protective fury rise within me. "Grace is my goddaughter," I said coldly. "Does anyone here have a problem with that? You already accepted another woman as your new mother. Why can't I choose whose family to me? I know exactly what kind of person Grace is. If any of you had shown me even half the care and warmth she has, I wouldn't be standing here today feeling like a stranger in my own life." Grace gently held my arm, her quiet support saying more than words ever could. Together, we turned and walked out of the room, leaving my blood relatives stunned into silence. Sometimes family is found in the most unexpected places, like a hand offering a tissue on a crowded bus, when you're at your most vulnerable and alone. I had gone to the hospital for a routine checkup, nothing special. But when I walked into the consultation room, I froze. There they were, James, Daniel, Anna, Leona, even Zach and Olivia all crammed into the room like unwelcome ghosts from a life I'd left behind. James rushed toward me, grabbing my hand with both of his. "Clara, why didn't you tell me you had cancer?" His voice trembled, nearly breaking. I hadn't seen him in months, and now he looked like a shell of himself, gaunt, worn down, with panic carved into every line of his face. Daniel's eyes were red. "Mom, how could you keep this from us? This is cancer." Anna's voice cracked. "If Dad hadn't been cleaning the house and stumbled across your old medical report, we still wouldn't have known." It was ironic, really. The same report that had sat ignored on our coffee table for 3 days before I left the one they'd stepped around and over while demanding dinner and childcare had suddenly become the focus of their concern. Months too late. The doctor, noticing my discomfort, intervened. "She's in recovery. Emotional stability is essential to her healing. Please refrain from upsetting her." After a pause, Daniel mumbled, "If we'd known earlier, we would have hired help. We never meant for you to do everything on your own." Just then, Grace walked in. Having just paid my medical bill, she gently held my arm, her voice protective. "Clara, What did the doctor say about staying in good spirits? Don't let things like this weigh on you. Let's go home. I smiled at her and nodded. All right. That simple exchange sent a ripple through the room. Anna froze. Mom, who is she? Daniel looked equally startled. Mom? Why are you leaving with her? Leona broke her silence with characteristic tactlessness. Clara, I really think you need to be careful. You've got 3 properties and plenty of money. What if she's just here for your inheritance? That money was supposed to go to Daniel and Anna. Zach and Olivia are counting on it too. To my surprise, James slapped Daniel hard across the face. Tell your wife to shut her damn mouth, he hissed. Don't you ever repeat something so disgraceful again. My heart burned with fury. Grace is my goddaughter, I said coldly. If any of you had shown me even half the care and warmth she has, I wouldn't be standing here today feeling like a stranger in my own life. And even if she were after my money, so what, I'd rather give it all to her than to people who only see me as a burden. Without waiting for a response, I took Grace's hand and walked out. As we left, I caught a glimpse of my children's faces, not angry anymore, but shaken, ashamed, and perhaps a little afraid. I thought they would finally back off, but the very next day, James showed up at my door. He looked worse than before, hollowed cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, his voice hoarse. I was wondering if I could come in, he said quietly. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I let him in without a word, offering no welcome. He wasn't a guest. I hadn't invited him. He wandered through my apartment, eyes scanning the paintings on the walls, my work, my rediscovered passion. Clara, you really started painting again. His voice was soft, almost in awe. Your work feels stronger than it used to, and you look more alive, like the woman you were when we first met. He paused, taking in my new home. This place feels warmer than I expected, like a real home. Our old house just feels like an empty shell now. I remained silent, returning to my easel. I'm not with Vivian anymore, he continued. Truth is, I never really planned to get back together with her. After all these years, I realized it wasn't her I missed. It was who I used to be when I was with her. But when I found your medical report, everything snapped into focus. His eyes met mine. That day, I realized I never cared for you enough. I never truly saw you. My brush faltered. I stared at the canvas, suddenly unsure where the next stroke should fall. I'm sorry, Clara, he said. I never wanted the divorce. Not really. I wasted so many years. Can I have a chance to make it right? A single tear dripped onto my canvas, dissolving a stroke of color into a soft blur. I think that's enough for today, I said softly. Please leave. After he left, I stood at the window, watching his slumped figure retreat down the street. For decades, I had longed for this, for James to see me, truly see me, for my children to recognize my worth beyond the meals I cooked and the care I provided. Now that it had finally happened, I felt nothing but a quiet sadness. Their regret had come too late. The attention, the concern, the sudden realization of my value, it arrived only after I'd learned to live without it. I no longer needed their validation to feel complete. In the months that followed, they continued their attempts at reconciliation. James would appear outside my building with grocery bags. Daniel and Anna would call from new numbers when I blocked the old ones. Even Vivian reached out once, offering awkward apologies. But I held firm to my boundaries. The cancer treatments were working, my painting was flourishing, and Grace had become the daughter I'd always longed for, one who saw me as a person, not a function. Sometimes. The hardest lesson for a family to learn is that love isn't just about needing someone, it's about seeing them, genuinely and completely, before it's too late. One evening during a quiet walk through town, I passed a small vintage-looking art studio tucked into a side street. It had that nostalgic charm, warm lights, soft music, and the unmistakable scent of linseed oil and canvas. I walked in casually at first, and there, seated at an easel, was an elderly woman painting in complete concentration. I stood quietly behind her, watching for nearly half an hour before she turned around. We both froze. It was Diane, my college professor, the one who had once believed in me more than anyone else. She was over 80 now, her hair silver, her body frailer, but she still painted, and her reputation had only grown through the years. When she recognized me, her face lit up with warmth and disbelief. "Clara, you still have that look in your eyes. I'd know you anywhere." And she poured me tea as we talked. I told her everything about the years that had passed, about the life I'd lived, about my recent divorce and cancer diagnosis. She listened quietly, then looked at me, her gaze steady. "I always knew you had real talent," she said. "You shouldn't have left it behind." I shook my head. "It's been decades. I've forgotten everything." She smiled gently. "Then start again from the beginning, just for yourself, no pressure. Think of it as a hobby, just something that brings you joy." Something in me softened. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. That night, I picked up a brush. The first attempts were clumsy, my hands stiff, my lines shaky, the techniques long gone. I was almost embarrassed by how rusty I'd become, but I kept going, day after day. I practiced slowly, steadily. I began to remember. I found my rhythm again, and with it, I rediscovered a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Diane looked over a few of my practice pieces one afternoon, her eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "I always said you weren't just a good student," she said softly. "There's emotion in your strokes. You tell stories with your colors. You have depth." She paused, then added, "To be honest, Clara, if you hadn't married so young, you'd probably be a professional artist by now." I looked down, smiling faintly. "I'm sorry, Professor. I really did waste the gift you saw in me." She patted my hand gently and replied with a warm smile. "But it's never too late, my dear. You still have time. You're just getting started." I blushed, nodding quietly, and this time, truly, deeply believing her. Ever since I picked up the paintbrush again, my treatment days stopped feeling so heavy. Painting became my refuge, my distraction, my therapy, my rhythm. The hours passed easier, the fear receded, and even the pain seemed more bearable when my hands were busy blending color on canvas. Grace, ever the cheerleader, kept urging me to share my progress with others. "You should create an account," she insisted, "not just to connect with other painters, but to show other women it's never too late to start again. You could inspire so many people, women who feel stuck, invisible, forgotten. You could remind them they're not alone." Eventually, I gave in. She helped me set up an account and named it Ink and Grace, a soft tribute to both art and the life we were building from scratch. I started posting quietly photos of my progress, my sketches, my canvases, no talking heads, no self-promotion, just the quiet intimacy of brushstrokes, colors, and layers forming on canvas. To my surprise, the account began to grow. Slowly at first, then steadily. More and more people followed some fellow artists. Some strangers simply drawn to the quiet beauty of reinvention. The platform eventually reached out to collaborate, offering ad partnerships and promotion. I'd accidentally become a modestly popular art creator and earned a little extra income on the side, but I never showed my face. Every photo, every video featured only my hands at work or the soft silhouette of me painting in a pool of sunlight. Just a woman rebuilding a life in silence. A new beginning without noise, without labels, without apologies. On my 67th birthday, I held my very first solo landscape exhibition. It was a clear, sunlit day. My old professor attended in person, standing proudly on stage to make a special announcement I would be her final student. That moment drew attention from the local press, a few art critics, and even some national media. My story, the former housewife who rediscovered herself through art, suddenly became a headline. On the last day of the exhibition, while chatting with a few gallery guests, I noticed familiar figures standing quietly in the corner. James, thinner than before, face lined with exhaustion. Daniel, Anna, Zach, and Olivia. Their faces a mix of surprise and disbelief, clearly not expecting to see me here, let alone hosting a successful show. From their stunned expressions, I could tell James had never told them I'd started painting again. They certainly had no idea that the increasingly popular art account, Ink and Grace, was mine. "Mom, you look younger than you did 2 years ago," Anna said, stepping in beside them, equally wide-eyed. "You've been painting this whole time. Why didn't you ever tell us?" Daniel asked. "Grandma, this is incredible. You're better than the artists we learn about in school," Zach said excitedly. "Nana, I think I want to be like you when I grow up," Olivia added, beaming up at me. I just smiled gently without saying much. Daniel and Leona looked tired, worn down. I'd heard they divorced last year, and from the way they watched me now, I could see the questions hanging in their eyes, things they wanted to say, stories they maybe wanted to rewrite, but I wasn't about to give them that chance. I had other guests to welcome. Grace was already approaching with a group of her classmates, smiling brightly, waving from across the gallery. As I began to walk away, James stepped closer again and said in a low voice, "I used to hold on to the hope that maybe you'd come back one day, but I get it now. You've walked too far forward. There's no going back anymore." I laughed, full and free. "You're right," I said, "because this is the life that finally belongs to me. The tides of life come and go. Maybe we'll cross paths again someday. But when we do, we'll just be old acquaintances, nothing more." The woman they knew, the invisible homemaker, the taken-for-granted wife and mother no longer existed. In her place stood an artist with her own vision, her own voice, and finally, her own story to tell. When I finally stood in my art gallery on my 67th birthday, surrounded by my paintings and well-wishers, I felt a peace I had never known before. The cancer treatments had worked. My art career was flourishing, and Grace, my chosen family, stood proudly by my side. For the first time in decades, I felt complete. not as someone's wife, mother, or grandmother, but simply as myself. I noticed them before they saw me, James, looking older and more worn, Daniel and Anna with their children, all staring in stunned silence at my paintings. When our eyes finally met, I saw a mixture of surprise, regret, and perhaps a hint of pride. They moved cautiously toward me, like approaching a stranger they once knew intimately. "Mom, you look younger than you did 2 years ago," Anna said, clearly shocked by my transformation. "Grandma, your paintings are incredible," Zach exclaimed with genuine admiration. James approached last, his voice low and thoughtful. "I used to hope you'd come back someday, but I understand now you've walked too far forward. There's no going back." I smiled gently. "You're right," I replied. "This is the life that finally belongs to me." As they stood awkwardly in my new world, I felt no bitterness, no urge to prove myself or seek their approval. The woman desperate for validation had disappeared along with the cancer cells. In her place stood someone stronger, creative, and finally free to breathe as herself. The tides of life come and go. Perhaps we'll cross paths again, but when we do, we'll just be old acquaintances sharing polite smiles, nothing more. And that's perfectly okay. Dear friends, Clara's journey teaches us something profound. It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. So many of us spend years, even decades, living according to others' expectations, shrinking ourselves to fit into spaces that were never designed for our full selves to flourish. The most heartbreaking prison is the one we build ourselves, believing we don't deserve more than the scraps of attention and appreciation others toss our way. Remember this, your value doesn't diminish because someone fails to see it. Your talents don't disappear because you've set them aside. Your dreams don't expire because you've postponed them. Sometimes, the most courageous act isn't facing an external enemy. It's finally looking in the mirror and acknowledging the person you've abandoned, the one who had passions, dreams, and a voice before the world convinced you they weren't important enough to pursue. Clara needed a cancer diagnosis to realize her life had been slipping away, unlived. What will it take for you to recognize the unlived life within you? Don't wait for a crisis to give yourself permission to matter. If Clara could reinvent herself at 65 and find her artistic voice at 67, what might be waiting inside you, longing for expression? What small step could you take today toward reclaiming a forgotten piece of yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of yourself have you set aside that deserves to be rediscovered? What dreams have you postponed that still whisper to you in quiet moments? If Clara's story touched your heart today, please consider subscribing to our channel. Each week, we share stories of transformation that remind us it's never too late to begin again, together. Let's inspire each other to live with courage, authenticity, and the unwavering belief that we are worthy of a life that truly belongs to us. Until next time, remember the chapters of your life that haven't been written yet might be the most beautiful ones of all.